Hello, everyone. I'm Tzvi Levy. I'm the lead for the Streets as Public Space group. So the purpose of our group is to actually recognize that streets are in fact public space. This is a topic that people don't necessarily appreciate. You know, the street is a place for cars and people and what have you, but it actually belongs to all of us. And in most cities, approximately 1/3 to up to a half of the built environment is actually often streets in the built environment. So the goal of this group is to really sort of stimulate thinking around that topic and to explore how different places are doing that. And because streets are often highly contested, you know, how do we use that space? Who decides what are the priorities there? You know, it can shift at different times of day. So really the purpose of our group is to really stimulate thinking and to understand how different places approach the topic. And there's no sort of right or wrong here. It's really just recognizing that it is public space and what in fact does that mean that it's public space. This is actually a very deep and profound topic. So that's what I hope to hear, and we have participants from all around the world, so I look forward to some very interesting discussions. Thank you. Okay, I think we can probably assume that we are finished.
Yes.
Marta, for you, in the first session, I asked everyone actually, what is this, when you hear these words, streets is public space, what does that mean to you? Like, what do you think about when someone says streets is public space? What does that mean to you?
Streets as public space. Well, it definitely invokes many thoughts. It's on one hand, it's for example, the positive things that can be associated with streets. On the other hand, these could mean things that I experienced since, for example, childhood or during my travels, and what I've been seeing all around the world, how streets actually look and how they serve people. And luckily, I've been to places that have a good walking infrastructure. Most of them have. And I was not forced to use a car. And so this makes me think of streets as a space for me, a person without a car. And then I get confronted with ideas from people, for example, from our pedestrian space, when we see that not all people have streets as a public space. Most of them have streets as a space for car traffic. And so that's where I actually start from when thinking about streets.
Okay, thank you. Have you ever experienced North American style suburbia or in any other country, like where it's almost impossible to walk anywhere?
Yes, I've never been to America, so I would say I haven't. And the closest thing that I could say that looks a little bit like it is, I guess, the UK, but the suburbia there, I mean,
it's still different.
It's absolutely different, but the way it's similar is that you have a lot of, cul-de-sac, you have single family homes, and very often they span out to suburbia, even in small towns.
Yeah.
They could be very large area-wise. So, but then still they are walkable. You can get to them on foot. So yeah, that would be the closest thing, but it's still, I believe it's not like the United States or Canada at all.
Yeah, well, and also the UK has a very interesting public space, I think, in general, and I think a lot of the British history actually, the enclosure rules, like relating to who, like being able to own land, like that an individual can own land, like that's actually a very profound concept that began in the UK, actually, and it was most greatly realized in North America, in the United States at least, like this idea that an individual can actually own the land and do with it as they want. And so ironically, a lot of, you know, the land is, you can't move land. like it's there, and like, you know, historically, you know, it sort of belonged, like there were different categories of land. You know, this might belong to the people, this might belong to the commons, and this might belong to the ruler, and then there are other things that belong to God, sort of. And this idea of being able to own land, and you can use it, you can mortgage it basically, and to like, you can borrow against it. That was sort of what led to Western development. And even streets for that matter, like we don't realize barely 100 years ago, governments didn't build streets. Like, like that was not something they didn't have the money. And when governments started investing in that, that led to a whole new scale of government, and like completely changed everything about everything, essentially.
Yes, yes. And also that in the States, I mean, the States developed like right before the Industrial Revolution. So let's say when steam engines and then later on cars started coming onto streets. So the streets didn't evolve with, for example, horse carriages or people walking, but with some sort of machines, or at least maybe even military movements. So they were absolutely different than, for example, European streets. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Raphael, did you have anything you want to add?
Right. So streets.
Where have you lived? I'm actually curious.
What?
Where do you call home? Do you have a place that you feel is your home?
Well, now I call Stockholm home. I came from Hong Kong. I can say a lot of stuff about Hong Kong, but I don't really have a sense of home for Hong Kong now.
And
So,
you feel at home in Stockholm?
yeah, I feel more home in Stockholm.
Okay, and you feel like that's your place, and that's that?
Well, sort of, but I'm still like exploring. Like, I might want to like move to other countries. For
Okay.
example, yeah, I want to move to America, by the way.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I ask this because I often know people who've lived in many places, and I mean, even for me, for many years I didn't really have a strong attachment to any place until I moved to Montreal. Actually, I'm not originally from here. And when I moved here, I fell in love with someone from Montreal. I was from, well, I was born in the States and grew up there, but I'm from Israel. And I met someone in Israel who was from Montreal, and we fell in love. And you know, she stayed a few more years there, but she had to go back to Montreal to finish her studies. So that's how I wound up being here. And I very quickly fell in love with this city as well. So
that's nice.
And okay.
Yeah.
And for you, the difference between Hong Kong and Stockholm must be very, very interesting. And Hong Kong is a rather unique place, I think.
Well, it is. I think in Hong Kong, like streets have almost always been vibrant public spaces, especially in Hong Kong, and like in southern China, there is a tradition of market towns, and so like most of the best examples of streets as public spaces in Hong Kong sprang up from these like market towns all around the territory. And in Hong Kong, it's like almost everywhere you see people, and there are always a mix of uses everywhere. And actually, even some of the ideas that are being discussed in the West, for example, like living right above shops, this actually is very common in Hong Kong as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think Hong Kong is much more dense than many other cities. So like the amount of space allocated to streets is by proportion is much smaller, like relative to, or it's just everything is more intense there.
Yeah, everything's more intense, but it's like there are also like road area, probably not as much as in, for example, America, but still quite like I think it's still quite a lot.
Yeah, but I imagine there's probably not much parking on the streets because there's no place to park.
There is, and it's usually like on the base building or in the basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been to Sweden, and I've seen it's very interesting. I like very much what they've done in a lot of northern European cities.
Mhm.
They have I think a very healthy understanding of space, and there's a longer history of the streets also serving as market cities. Like I think cities that were market cities before they became whatever you want to call the current type of city.
Really. There used to be three levels of municipalities in Sweden before 1970. I'm not sure if I got it correct year, but around that time. Before that, there were three levels of municipalities in Sweden. The top level is called a city. For cities, they have like a lot of rights. The right to make their own master plans, detailed plans, etc. Yeah, a lot. So city rights, and then below that, market towns. They have market rights, but not that much planning autonomy themselves. And the lowest level are the rural municipalities, so they can't make their own plans.
Interesting.
Yeah. This changed after around 1970, and now there is just only one level of municipality, and basically they can all of them can make their own plans.
And when they make their plans, though, where do streets fall into these plans? Like this is also a common challenge in many places. There are different levels of authorities, and the street is not necessarily the same, or it depends on the functional level of the street. And in North America, a lot of we've built highways everywhere.
Yeah.
And small towns want to have their they built the highway through the city.
Right.
So which in a way destroyed it, and then they built shopping malls outside of small towns. Like the shopping malls serve a larger region, and they're often on highway interchanges. And I know even in some parts of Europe they're doing this kind of thing, because I understand in Eastern Europe a lot of places are developing sort of like an IKEA outside of town will be sort of like a spur for new kinds of development patterns now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here in Sweden, I know that like the highways are also managed by the state, but then I don't really have an exact idea which ones are the ones managed by the state. I think because there are also like in-town freeways in Stockholm, and then most of the freeways in Stockholm they're branded as the E-roads. So
what does that mean? You have to pay for them?
E-road, no, E-road basically is the European highway system.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically the E-roads are for the most part state owned, but the rest are city owned.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Marta, like in our first session, I asked people if they wanted to present something about a place that encapsulated for them a street as a public space, and you said that you prepared something.
Yes.
Raphael, did you also have a chance to prepare something?
I might present a short example as well.
Okay, so Marta, do you want to present what you prepared now?
Yes, sure. Let me just share my screen. I guess you'll be able to see everything. I'm sorry, that's
it's okay. I see your cat.
My mom's daily updates on my cat because she's taking care of her. Yeah, I think you can see everything.
Yes.
So I was thinking about what kind of public space or what kind of street I should present, and as I will be talking about Kraków, there is a million different spaces that I could talk to you about, but I decided to choose one, and it's not the best space. It's not the prettiest. It's nothing like the best of something. It's just an example of a street that is undergoing many different changes, and they are related to, for example, the plan that the city has for adaptation to climate changes. It is an example of how urban spaces in Kraków are changing to, for example, bring Kraków closer to this network of green cities, because as on a side note, I can tell you that Kraków had an aspiration to become a green capital, and green capitals are cities in Europe that can obtain this certificate of green capital, and it is given to cities that are exceptionally green, sustainable, etc. And the idea that Kraków could become one was laughed at in the best sense, because Kraków is not a green city due to various reasons. For example, the fact that for many years the government has not been taking into consideration any sustainable projects. There's been a lot of development of like living spaces and cutting out of parks, etc. This trend is reversing right now, partly due to the European Union's initiatives. Also, the fact that the city is absolutely unlivable in summer. It's really, really hot. And for example, due to pollution. But I will not be going into all of these climate-related things at the moment, but I just wanted to highlight that I chose the street as an example of these kind of changes that are being implemented right now. So before I show you some photos and tell you a little bit about the street, I will show you it in the context and the maps. So I will be talking about Krupnicza Street. It's this street, it's around 1 kilometer long. And to tell you a little bit about the context, so let me just zoom out. Kraków is a city, basically this area here, and it's surrounded by like circles of highways or expressways, and even the streets inside the city, they all go in this pattern of circles. You could actually do circles around the city, and the closer to the main square, the tighter the streets are, etc.
Are those circles because of like defensive walls that were there in the past?
I'm sure this is a part of it. So the old streets are definitely medieval, like the one around the main square, the old town. And then you have the historical routes here, the main alleyways. And then these are just modern ones, like going around the highways. So yes, this is a mixture of very medieval planning and then, you know, the city expanding gradually. So Krupnicza Street is a very lively street and connects the old town, the central district, with a district here that is host to various universities. So you have the Technological University, the Scientific and Natural Sciences University. You also have universities close to the main square, etc. So it's a street frequented by tourists and by students. There are two popular theaters, one here, a lot of like shops and food courts and many different places that entice people to go there. The problem is that for many years, the street has not been renovated, and many many of the historical buildings on it were just forgotten, and they were like, well, they don't look as attractive as they could or did in the past. But because the city is trying to adapt it to meet this vision of a very green public space. Just go back to my presentation.
Can I ask a question quickly?
Yeah. Yes.
Does this street carry a lot of traffic, or did it ever carry a lot of traffic at any point?
Yeah, this is the thing, the very interesting thing. It does not have intense traffic. One thing is that the street is not wide. You have sidewalks on two sides of it. In the center, in the middle of the street, there is a small hospital, so the traffic cannot be large at all. There is a space for people to go out a lot, so you cannot have a lot of traffic because this would be dangerous. However, this street evolved a little bit into a road that prioritizes car traffic. But still, you could walk on the street, walk on the road, and it was perfectly normal. This is what it looked like. So you have this asphalt road that's been patched many times, and it looks terrible, with car park spaces painted on it, with cars parking.
It's a two-way street, or is it?
Part of it is two-way. It's a little bit complicated because some of it is one-way street that goes in a circle, and then one part is like everyone does what they want. So it's not planned well.
Okay.
At least
well,
it used to be.
I mean, sometimes that's better actually when it's not planned well.
Yeah, so because it was like, you know, free for all, everyone did what they wanted, but just because the car traffic was not very intense, and it was relatively safe for people walking. But then cars parked alongside the road, sometimes a little bit on the footpath, which was like, I really don't like it when cars do that. But on one side you had gardens from a few bars or restaurants on the road, and you know, it was very tight. You could have a car going there, which was not ideal, and yeah, this street was basically just left as it was, but it's been undergoing many changes. And this is a visualization of how the new street will look like. So since I believe it was 2019, the city has been consulting the citizens actively on what kind of changes they want to see. And one of because we have this thing called like consultations for citizen budget. So citizens can decide what a part of the city budget will go towards. So they decided that this street should be renovated because of its value for actually pedestrians more than cars. So like, because people wanted this to be more for pedestrians. And so they decided to plant a lot of trees to adapt this street to this kind of design, or more like urban planning idea called Vonerv, if I pronounce it correctly.
Vonerv, yeah. Do you know what that is, Raphael?
You mean Vonerv, yeah.
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 It's like the Dutch concept. It's like I think it means living courtyard, but it's like a shared space like where car can go, but it's really a pedestrian place.
Yes, like preference for pedestrians, absolutely. So on this street, the space for cars will only be to people who need to get to their houses or for delivery vans. Also probably within specific hours during the day and not all of them. And right now, this is not the full street. This is just one piece of it that's being renovated right now. And in the future, all of it should be renovated, but it's still good. So and also another idea that they had for the renovation is not only Vulnerv, but it's also something called blue-green infrastructure. And this is urban planning that takes into consideration water and greenery. So how to, for example, retain rainwater to make it efficient, to not let it dry out too quickly, to not go into to not turn into wastewater, to maybe use it for watering plants, things like this, and also to increase the number of green plants or greenery in general, or sustainable furniture to, for example, cool down the city or to make it more walkable. And these are the ideas, these are the visualizations that I found online for how the street will look like. So actually comparing to this, it's, I think, beautiful. I think it's still a little bit too much of brick, but that's probably not how it will look in the end. But we can see that they are planning to actually keep the rainwater and water the plants, the trees and the shrubbery and the flowers that will be growing here.
That's one of the things I noticed in your earlier photos. Like now there's no greenery at all. Like
Yes,
it's all, and it's actually, I know in in Montreal, it's we struggle to have plants survive in an urban environment. In Kraków, are there places right now where there are trees, because they need roots, need space to go?
Yes, I mean, we still have a lot of parks, a lot of green spaces, but it's mostly the center that's been neglected. And for example, the pollution that was accumulating on buildings during the socialist era left like almost a black film on the buildings. But now the city can, if you wanted to renovate your building, you would not get a permission to paint it in dark colors. So what's something that we can see already here, the buildings are almost white in the planning. And even on these buildings, the ones that are renovated, they're all light in color. So this has been thought of as well. And about the root system that you mentioned, I also read in the description of this design that because they need to get rid of the asphalt.
Right.
This is like, I think, something so simple that I was not even considering before, but now I think about it, like, this is not healthy for the city. Asphalt is not healthy, it's not breathable, and bricks are healthier. It lets the earth be a little bit more nutrition, but they also need to replace the earth, the soil that's on, like, below this street. And
do you have any idea what is underneath this space? Like, do you have a subway system? Are there?
No, we don't have subway. Kraków cannot really have a subway because it's a historical city. We have too many buildings with underground basements, etc. And you will not get permissions to, like, destroy parts of the city to build a subway. So we will probably never have it. We might have more of tramways.
Okay, so like these buildings that we see here, do they have basements right now? Do you know?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, yes, and they also have courtyards, so they are utilized more for car parking, or at least will be. Like the way we can see, for example, on this photo here, because
So a car would go in there and park underground?
it will park in the yard, likely,
okay.
most likely. The basements are more of livable spaces, because you need to think about them as a space that people utilized centuries ago. So more for example, for people who wanted to keep their food cooler. So this is how the basements are built. They're not adapted for cars, not in the centers. In other parts of the city, yes, because they're more modern. So we would have underground parking. For example, in the block of flats that I used to live until the end of April, we had an underground parking car park, but it was a modern building. Yeah.
Okay.
But
And in,
about
in Krakow, do you have underneath some of the municipal parks? Do they sometimes have parking under the parks?
Parks. I cannot think of any park that would have an underground car park. We have some underground car parks, and one of them is located in front of a big museum, a national museum. But then on top of it, you don't have a soil. You have just something similar to this, like big concrete tiles and flower pots.
And is parking a big problem in your city?
Yes, it's absolutely terrible. Actually, a lot of people who a lot of people who come from Kraków, or for example, had the opportunity to live there during studies, because Kraków is a university city, say that they would never like to live there because they are car drivers, and the city is not for car drivers, absolutely not. One of the reasons is that the streets are too narrow. It's a historical city. They are not adapted to this massive amount of cars that we have at the moment. There's a lot of roadworks, not enough car parks because they just don't have space for that. It's just terrible, and city is actually trying to restrict the car usage everywhere. For example, in the center, in the central districts, you cannot drive in there with old type of cars that use diesel or and the area of this restriction will gradually expand, which obviously enrages a lot of people, but I mean, it's fine. But at the same time, city is expanding the tramway infrastructure. It is implementing more buses. I wish it was working more on bike lanes, but it's not doing that yet. Hopefully they will start doing that soon.
And does this central, like the old city, is it's well served by tramway or by buses, or can people get there? Yeah.
Yes. The city center is totally walkable, and actually no one goes to the city center by car unless you want to flex with like a very good car, but there's no other reason, because it's too walkable, and I'm sure that Annika could testify that and she does with all the pictures that she posts, so we can see that. And so just to go back to the question that you had before about the soil, I also read that they are planning to replace the soil underneath this street to implement like different types of soil with different porosity, or I'm not a geologist, so I cannot tell you how it works exactly, but this type of soil will allow the root system to grow more efficiently. So they are also thinking about that.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and so these are a few of my photos that I took like a few days before I was leaving Poland at the end of April. So the street is already being renovated. At the moment, I mean, at least at that time, they were renovating the pipe system and the heating system in the city. And in the street, they will not just, patch the road and finish it up. Once they finish renovating the pipelines, they will actually strip the road and the sidewalk and start rebuilding the public space of the street from the scratch. And one more thing that I wanted to point out is that because it's 2022, you cannot have urban planning without thinking about mobility. And like all type of urban planning didn't think about any type of curbs that could prevent people with mobility issues or just various types of mobility needs to actually use the street. But so here you have a curb, and you're lucky if you have like this dip, for example, that leads to doors or to gateways. But on this type of road, there is no such thing. It's all flat, maybe a little bit slanted towards the center, like
yeah. It's funny here in Montreal. We also are thinking very much about the universal access and having lots of discussions. And ironically, there's pushback. Like many people say that having no curb is dangerous for people who cannot see. so
yeah, that's interesting what you're saying. There is this thing that you can have different types of
texture.
Yeah. For like visually impaired people.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think this is really, the people who are saying this, usually they can see. So I mean, I'm like, there are, many European cities have very good design without a curb, and it can work if you do it well. And unfortunately,
yes.
we don't know how to do it well yet here. Like we're doing it in some places, and so far, most of our experiences have not been so great. But anyway, okay. Do you have anything more? This is very interesting, and I actually chose a place that is somewhat similar. Raphael, do you have something you would like to show? I think you're on mute.
Yep. Wait a second. Let's see. Yeah, it's the first time I share my screen on Zoom, so please bear with me.
That's
right.
Okay.
So can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah. So the example I want to show here in Stockholm, well, we have a lot of great streets in Stockholm, but this one is one of the most vibrant. It's called the Götgatan in the southern part of downtown.
Is that near Södermalm?
It's in Södermalm, yes. You know.
I think I was there maybe 10 years ago. Didn't look quite like this, but there were many things I was impressed with.
Yeah, I understand. Yes, so this is a very splendid street. Basically, it's a shopping street. And as you can see, it's basically shared by pedestrians and cyclists. Well, occasionally, on some sections, there are cars, however, for example. Cars, delivery cars, etc.
One of the things I noticed in Stockholm, which I was very impressed in, and maybe it was the street actually, it was pedestrian only for certain times of the day, like between maybe 10 and 8 in the evening or something like that.
Right.
And I thought that was a really interesting idea and a good way to sort of share the space at different times in different ways.
Yeah, that's true because for example, the delivery, so they need the street as well. So I can understand that. Yeah, the sign says that exactly.
Okay, so what does that means from 11 until 6 in the evening, or what does that mean? Or is that between 11?
6 a.m. the next
That
day.
is, so between 11.
11 so after 11 a.m. No cars.
Okay, until the next morning. So cars are only allowed in the morning, basically, between 6 and 11.
Morning. So also basically the deliveries. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So only 6 to 11.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, this street has an interesting history because it's called Götgatan because of its role as the main street that goes all the way out of town to the southern part of the country, which is called Götaland. So it's called Götgatan because this is basically where.
Can you go back a corner where the bike parking was?
The bike parking. This.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is in the street, correct? Are there, wait, are those just bikes that are left there, or are they attached to something?
Not
Okay,
very
okay,
sure.
I see there are things there, and that is in the street, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It should be a bike parking now, I think. Yeah, because I think the street view was taken in 2017, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that stays there that's there all the time. The bikes are parked there.
I think some bikes are always parked there.
Okay. But like after 11 or in the period when there's deliveries, like there can be bikes there. That's not a problem.
That's not a problem. Okay, this might be a better example. So the city installs this is an example of a city installed bike place.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like this, and actually the bar is right behind there.
I like the design of it.
Yeah.
I like that it's in the street and not on the sidewalk.
Right. Yeah. So basically, it's always like that, and as you can see behind the bike parking, there are some materials which are being, which I believe is about to be built as some sort of an outdoor seating for temporarily during the summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Stockholm, how cold does it get in the winter, and how much snow do you get?
Really, it varies from year to year. It can get very snowy in especially February.
Like, what does that mean? Very snowy, like 1 meter of snow at one time, or half of like 25 centimeters?
I've ever seen 1 meter of snow because that's quite a lot, even in Stockholm. But I think like 30 to 50 centimeters is something that can be expected of the winter, in typical winter in Stockholm.
Like that's the entire amount for the whole winter?
I've been in Stockholm for 2 years, and the first winter it was a really, really snowy February. And I did a lot of skiing. This year, I think it's less than last year.
Okay, and when you get a snowfall like that, does it stay on the ground and turn to ice, or does it melt afterwards? Like, how cold are the temperatures?
I think -10 Celsius, usually -5 to -10.
Okay.
Yeah, but sometimes it gets warmer.
Okay, in Montreal, it's the opposite.
But
yeah, like in Montreal, we can go maybe an entire month where it's never warmer than -20 or so.
Wow. Yeah,
so,
but that's Canada, so I get it.
Yeah, but I mean, even in other, like Toronto is much warmer. Like we have different challenges in the winter here, and I'll talk about that a bit when I present. Okay, I was just trying to. I know Sweden, I would think you have lots of snow and things, but when I was there in December and the temperatures were very comfortable. So.
Yeah, it's much warmer here in Stockholm, and which reminds me of one issue here. Like I realized different countries have different ways of dealing with snow on streets. like in Sweden, in large cities like Stockholm and Gothenburg, the street workers diligently drive all those machines to clear off the snow on the streets.
Yeah.
But I think in Norway they simply ignore them. People simply wear spike shoes to prevent slippery.
Yeah.
Yeah, slippery interesting.
Well, yeah. Also,
Yeah.
so we could perhaps in the future we'll have an entire topic just about how we deal with public space in winter and who is responsible for that.
That's a nice topic. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and this is the Medborgarplatz, and it's so basically means citizen square.
Is that where there's a skating rink in the winter? Outside?
There are skating rinks, but I forgot where. Yeah. There are skating rinks. Yes.
I remember that. I think my hotel was right across the street, actually.
Aha. Okay.
That
Yeah.
one, the white one there, the white and
Scandic.
gray. Is that a hotel or something?
Yep. Scandic is a large hotel chain in the Nordics.
Yeah, that's where I stayed.
Probably the largest. Yeah. Get it.
May
Yep,
I ask how long the street is?
Hmm?
How long is that street?
Formally, it technically extends from that thing there called Slussen. Slussen is like the sluice, like the water gate, and goes all the way to a place called Skånstu, where it becomes a highway.
All right,
But
so
you
very
can,
long.
yeah, and it goes off the island. Like I actually was giving a training class. I walked across the bridge
Mhm.
to Skånstu on the highway, like where it became a highway and the train goes there. And I think there was a bike path, and I walked across that, and there was this sort of sports center shopping mall place that was where the offices where I was actually teaching was in that location. Yeah, so to the right, you walk across there.
Yeah.
And I
So
did that, and that.
Is it walkable all the way through?
Yeah, there's a path where you walk where the trains go next to it, and the pedestrians and the bikes they go here, and the cars are on the other side.
Yeah, you can see it here as well. Actually, before they this bridge used to be 2 lanes in each direction for cars, and then some years ago they closed off 1 lane to create the situation. Like
Yeah, it's much wider.
This situation that we have now is for cycles, and so we have 1 whole lane for cycles, and likewise around like almost as wide for pedestrians, and 1 lane left for cars and buses.
Yeah, when I was, it was not so wide when I was there.
Right. And
is that still where the congestion charge going across that bridge is where you pay to go into the congestion zone?
There are a lot of places where you have to pay for the congestion zone. I don't recall exactly where the cordon is in the south, but basically I see those gantries everywhere.
Okay. And I was there, I think right when it might have still been in a pilot project phase when I was there. And I think when you cross the bridge at the time, that was where they were doing the study. Like basically when you got onto Södermalm, that was where you had to pay.
I see. Yeah. By the way, they are about to also do the same treatment on this side for the other side as well. So they're also going to close another lane northbound.
Okay.
Yeah, and do the same.
So that's probably the result of the pricing, because I imagine that made car traffic much less interested to go into the city.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more important now to allow other options and to give them more priority. And it was very annoying when I was there. You had to walk on only one side of the bridge, and it was really only like 1.5 meters. So it wasn't. and it was shared with bicycles. So it wasn't great to walk there. And there weren't a
Okay.
lot of cyclists, but there were still, it wasn't nearly as wide as that. And then when you got into the metro station, it was very confusing, actually.
This is what you just said, Svi, is something that I also read some time ago, and I really like the strange idea is that to make a livable space, it's enough to make it unattractive for car users, and then the pedestrians will come naturally. So you don't need to make it super attractive for pedestrians.
Yeah.
The pedestrians will then transform it according to their needs over time. But as long as it's not attractive for cars, then cars will not go there.
Yes.
Well, this is an interesting point because it really depends if pedestrians will come, because it also depends on the quality of the space, the facilities, seating, etc., which is exactly the realm of my working group, which is placemaking.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically that's another whole area, how to attract people to an empty space.
Yeah,
Yes.
but this is literally like I'm seeing. Yeah, this is exactly where I walked, and that's the metro station beyond.
Yeah,
And yeah, at the time it was, yeah, this is exactly, I had to go. It wasn't clear to me, like you had to go whether it was easier for me to actually go on the train tracks because I was going to that big building you see in the distance. But to get there, it was not. So you had to like go through these interior sort of walkways. And the first time it was quite complicated. Then I learned.
The whole area is very complicated because of all the bunch of highways, and even for a while I cycled a lot to the south side of the city, and it's extremely confusing around that part with the jumble of interchanges and stuff. And I remember it's like the cycleway actually goes into the air for a stretch outside of the Globen. And super weird, and then suddenly dives down to a tunnel. Pretty challenging for me physically. That's the Globe. And also coincidentally, I was also in the area yesterday for a nightclub at a place called Schlagshuset. It's like an abattoir, a former abattoir converted into a nightclub.
Okay. One of the things I really noticed when I was walking across that bridge is you could really see the different levels of development. Like they were on different heights, sort of, and there were even things on the water. And there was like a sports complex that I walked over, I think. And it was very interesting just to see how the different levels worked. And I mean, I have no idea how you could get from one to the other. Like you'd walk across and you could see below, oh, there might be a bar down there that looks very interesting. but how do I get there?
Yes, so it's very complex situation. So the bridge you see here is the first bridge, which is actually this was like before a city gate used to be, and then it was taken down 100 or 200 years ago and replaced by a simple bridge like that, and then two more bridges were added afterwards.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed and I really enjoyed about Stockholm was they sort of think in networks. Like there are a lot of cars in the city, but they sort of push the cars away from areas. Like they make it hard to drive there, and they make it easier for people to walk. And like when I came, as I was there for work, and I arrived, I think Friday night, very late. And I was started to work on Monday morning. So I had like Saturday and Sunday to walk around the city. And I really did walk. And you can walk very far and you don't really feel the cars. It was very impressive. Like you could go, walk all the way through the old town, out the other side and continue walking into these areas.
Yeah.
and they sort of keep the car traffic away. So like it's not very often that you cross a busy intersection.
Right.
And like this intersection here, I remember this area,
Yes.
and I
They opened
think
a new bridge here 2 years ago.
yeah. So but you could sort of, they would have like pathways or ways that for pedestrian you could sort of avoid that, and you wouldn't have to be exposed to the uncomfortable. You would go over it or around it or under it or something, and it was very
Right.
well sort of like they would think is in terms of how do you create a system
Yeah.
that is continuous. So it was easy to sort of
Yeah.
to negotiate
Mm.
comfortably, whereas at least in North America, like even when they make a pedestrian area, you very often you have to cross streets, um, and it's not comfortable. So you might walk a block as a pedestrian zone, but then at every single corner you're crossing a street, and it's not comfortable again.
Right.
So
Actually, they're also they're remodeling the area, so you see it's all construction at the moment.
okay.
I think it's gonna be done in 2 years. So 2 years later, it'll be a large public square here at Stockholm.
And I think there's a port in somewhere in that area where the boats come as well, not far from there.
Yeah, it's just right next to the Stadsgården. Yeah, it's where all the ships park, and also
Yeah.
Skeppsbron. So yeah, so ship bridge basically. Skeppsbron means.
I remember. And I guess Stockholm has many tourists who come by boat, and they go to, that's near the old town, I guess, Gamlastan, is that what it's called?
Yep. So the island at the middle is called Gamlastan, and the boats from the Finland boats, there are two places. So one is pretty near downtown, and the other not so near.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting.
Yep.
Is there anything more that you wanted to add?
Not sure, but probably you've already known about it, but I'm working on that one advocacy to close down the Central Freeway in Stockholm, which is this one.
Okay.
That's the freeway I talk about.
What do you mean close it down?
Like I'm starting a campaign to convert this freeway into a linear park.
Ah, cool.
Yeah. So this freeway basically goes right through Gamlastan.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, so not very pretty. And
But okay, so that's interesting because I mean I was only there fairly briefly, and Gamlastan was too touristy for me. But I did not notice the freeway like when I was there.
Okay, I noticed the freeway the first time I've been to Stockholm, so it made a very everlasting impression on me because I walked from the central station to the Gamlastan, and I used the path that takes me to this place, which is not very pretty, as you can see.
Yeah.
So I always remember this freeway.
I think I might have had almost had a similar experience. It's interesting how our lives. I took the bus from the airport that brought us to some sort of downtown metro station.
Yeah.
And the metro was still operating, but we could not find our way in. Like the door to the station was locked where we were, and we could. Yeah, like there must have been another entrance or something. We couldn't figure out how to get into the station.
Okay.
And in the end, we just took a cab. And I mean, because we didn't know where we were going. And I mean, like afterwards, I realized we could have very easily walked, but I didn't know that. And it was like 1 a.m. And,
then I get it.
but we didn't. We may have gone through this area by car, and I didn't notice. And then the next day when I walked, it was much more pleasant. Like where I was walking, it was much more easier.
Right. I get it. Yeah,
So
and And
I
also
recognize that area as well. Yeah.
this area. Yeah, this is another not so pretty, not so pretty part of Stockholm, because as you can see, the highway takes up the entire promenade.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, a product of the modernism half a century ago.
Yeah,
But
why would you have a highway right like on the riverbank?
well, it's because the right of way, basically, the river exists already. So it's usually easier for cities to sort of acquire the right of way along like water barriers or old defensive barriers and things like that.
Mhm.
So you don't have to pay a lot of people to push the road there. And it often, I mean, yeah, like up until maybe the 60s or 70s, we thought that cars were the future and modernism, and the
Right.
car was like real. Everyone's going to go around by car. What I find interesting about Stockholm is, like, yes, they have these ugly highways, but I find that they're not as disruptive as they are in other cities that I've been in. Like I found that they were sort of like, and there is a lot of vehicle traffic in Stockholm, like a lot of cars, but they keep them away from where the people are. So like the pedestrian networks are not along the water necessarily here. Like there are some parts where they are, but you would be walking along places where you don't see the freeways, you don't hear them, and there's good passageways to get around them. So they keep the sort of networks apart, and they sort of make the cars, like you might be able to drive a car into the central area, but if you want to go to another area, they force you back onto the highway. So they sort of force the driver to make a big circle
Yeah.
instead of walking a short walk. So I think that's a very interesting approach that they have done there. So okay. So I think why don't I'll try and do a sort of quick presentation of what I wanted to show.
Okay.
Okay, can you see my screen? So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is an area where I actually did a study for, it's a sort of pedestrian mall that has cars as well. That it was an area that I think originally it was outside of sort of the central area, and it was a small section that developed quite quickly and had a lot of nightlife and things. And then as highways were added to the region, it evolved quite a bit and lost sort of its attraction. So they built these sort of they tried to convert it into a mall to compete with the urban malls that were or the suburban malls that were being created, and that hasn't been a huge success. So recently they completely rebuilt the road. So there was a lot of thinking about how to rebuild it and what to do, and I was involved in some of that thinking about how I was trying to promote them to think about the accessibility towards the location. I have some photos, but there's some photos here. More context is, so this is really the section here. It's really only 4 blocks where they have this sort of mall type thing. And along one side behind it, there's a number of parking lots. These, what you see in blue, these are bike lanes here. And we have a bike share system in Montreal. So there's a number of bike share stations nearby. This is a metro station. There's actually 3 metro stations that are quite close to this area, but they're not super accessible. Like that's one of the big problems is, so there's a lot of parking challenges. This is what it looked like before they did the renovations. The sign, there were like pedestrian crossings at certain locations, but they weren't, I don't know. It wasn't, like the overhang here, it made it a comfortable place protected from the winter. And we do have winters here, but as you can see, there was parking on both sides. And this structure was actually attached to the buildings. So it made it very difficult to maintain the buildings. The buildings were actually falling into a very bad state. And
Can I ask you something as you're at this photo? So is this a one-way street?
yes, it is.
Yeah, because then I can see that cars are parking facing
On
the
both
same
sides.
direction. So
Yeah.
both sides, yeah. So yeah.
So it used to be before it became this mall, it used to be two ways. And I don't think I have in here, I don't think I have any old photos, but there were photos from like the 50s where there was lots of car traffic and some big theaters and big shiny, like lots of people and lots of lights and lots of cars. So it was like a very crowded happening place like in the 50s and 60s. And then things changed and it lost a lot of the attraction. So they built this as a way to try to regain some of that attraction, but it didn't really work. So here's this is a photo of what it was before the renovations. And I was sort of analyzing, the force, what do you call it? Strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats of these various different things. So these are some of the design diagrams that were proposed. And one of the things, so they did remove all of the parking from one side. It still remains one way. There is a bus that goes along here as well. But one of the things which they did not do, and I was I pushed very hard for them to reconsider this, is there's no formal bicycle infrastructure on this street. So the idea was, well, there is a bike path. There are bike paths on streets on both sides. That's true. But this street is a commercial street though. Like the other ones are residential. And people, if you're on a bike and you want to come here, you're going to ride your bike here. And so technically it's a shared street, sort of like a Woonerf, but it's a good example of something that wasn't well implemented. So, but it's still like, in theory, bicycles have to go in the direction of traffic. Like there's nothing for the opposite direction. So what happens is the cyclists ride on the sidewalks. So that still happens. And that was something I was very disappointed about. So there are.
Sorry, one quick question is, so it's not legal to cycle in the other direction?
No, not here. Like if you have a sign, like there are some streets where it is permitted, and generally if it is a shared street, it should be permitted.
I see.
But it's not on this one. Like it's not really wide enough. Like I have other photos where you can see what it is now. Like this report was from before they did the renovations. So here you see often the cars, most of the traffic there is actually people looking for parking. And because there was on-street parking, people would sort of drive around and try and find, and half of it was free. So people would sort of spend their time looking for parking instead of just leaving their car in one of the available parking lots nearby. We do have winter here. This is a fairly typical winter scene. You can see the number of people. Like there's typically many more people than there are vehicles. And there is a bus that goes along here that often would be stuck in traffic as well. Like the bus didn't come at a very high frequency because it took so long to go through there. And it's near some metro stations anyway. So these are the sort of elevated crosswalks at certain locations. This is the approach. So this isn't on the mall, but you can see the sidewalks are actually really narrow for people to walk. So when you're walking, this is walking from the metro station towards this mall, and the sidewalks are actually really terrible. So these are some proposals. This is a metro station that has housing on top of it. And there are a lot of people who come out of this metro station, and there's a bike lane here, but like it's literally like not even 100 meters to the mall. But when you walk, this is what you're walking on. Like you can see the sidewalks are falling apart. It's very, very, the street is not wide, but there's actually even parking allowed here. And like two people walking side by side, there's not enough space, and it's just like total chaos. So here you have also like this is all going the other direction. Like this is walking from the metro station to the mall is up here. So this is looking back towards the metro station. So you can see like the sidewalk is barely a meter wide, and there's a bus stop actually on each side. So if people are waiting for the bus, they're like blocking pedestrian traffic. The bus can't move, the cars can't move. It's just not a very pleasant place to walk. This is another metro station which has a very wide space open, but there's actually barriers to cross the street here for pedestrians. So, and this is like what happens outside. This is at a metro station. You can see like there's physically not enough space on the sidewalk for people to stand. So they're going in the street, which has actually been made really wide for no particular reason. Like it was dug up to build the metro station eventually, like in the past. So when they rebuilt it, they made it very wide. And also, so these are some of the original buildings. And the way it's designed, like the cars sort of need to actually be, they need to cross the sidewalk and be essentially in the street in order to see if it's safe. Like you see, the sidewalk is here, and this car needs to advance like beyond to even see if they can go. So there's some problems with this. Anyway, yes.
Do you have this thing in Canada where you sometimes have mirrors?
Like at the intersection where you can see?
Yeah.
There are in some locations. This may not be a bad, like this is a good example of a place where perhaps that would help. But I think a better thing to do just hold on for 1 sec. Bye, Sadie. Have a good day. Bye. My daughter is leaving. I think a better thing would be sort of more like a Swedish approach where we just really limited the traffic and made it one way. Like it was planned actually that the street was supposed to be one way. Like right now you can see it's 2 ways and there's parking on both sides in certain areas. And so that's one thing that we do quite often in Montreal is we do have a lot of one-way streets. And this street actually in other locations, it's been converted into one way with cycle paths on each side. So bicycles can ride both ways. So that's something that this street it probably will happen in the future. Or another thing that might happen, and this is another thing which I suggested, is actually limiting the car traffic, like not allow between the metro station and the other side of the street, like have a section that was only for public transportation and people. So like allow the buses to go through there, allow people to go through there, bicycles to go through there, but cars have to go somewhere else. So this is the kind of thing that you see quite often in Europe, but we don't do that very often here. And there's part of the problem as well as who is responsible for the streets. Like some of these streets might be the local borough, and others might be a higher level of government. So the local borough is responsible for the sidewalks. So one of the things that they do is they might expand the sidewalk, but they would. And another thing, we like to use stop signs here in North America. Like in Europe, there's far fewer stop signs, and unfortunately here we tend to use stop signs as a traffic calming tool, and they're not really ideal. But I don't know, it's harder, it's easier to put up a stop sign than it is to make the road smaller.
Redesign everything.
Yeah, and I mean, here we did redesign something, but it actually hasn't helped with the real problem. This is that same intersection where the cars can't see. So you can see there's lots of cyclists here. And like, yes, we made the crosswalk bigger, but it actually doesn't really help any, like we put some green there, but it actually didn't really help in terms of anything really. Like you made the area where the pedestrians cross is not as long, but it's still not great. Like you see the cars coming out and like people are crossing here.
This is something that I keep seeing everywhere in the field related to public spaces and urban planning, is that to, for example, build a residential area, like normally citizens have no input on that, and this is entirely the decision of, for example, the city's president or politicians. However, to redesign the public space to serve the actual people who live in it, you need to have many different offices. You need to have engagement of the citizens set up. It takes years to do the smallest thing. Even the street that I presented, I counted about 6 different municipal offices that had to participate in the redesign to implement the changes. So it takes so much time and resources to even plan a change that serves the citizens in public
Yeah.
spaces.
That's actually a very good point. In Montreal, we have what are called commercial development organizations, which are associated with certain street sections.
Okay.
And this particular street section has an organization where those they represent the merchants who have stores there. And in this particular section, actually, very few people live there. So it's really the merchant society, if you will, who have a lot of power. And that's actually one of the frustrations is these organizations, they often have more power than the residents do. And for them, they perceive parking as being really the most important thing for their clients, who are the stores. And the people who live nearby don't, they want to walk there. Like there's another area that's very similar to this, where like there's battles basically between the people who live around the area who want it to be a pedestrian area and the merchant society who wants to preserve the parking and the car access. And in that particular area, like it really, really serves the local people. Like this zone that I'm showing you here, historically, at least it's been a little strange. Like it really has a niche market in certain kinds of things. So people come from quite far, perhaps, to go there. At least they did in the past, or that's sort of their argument, that people are coming from very far away. And whether or not that's true, and it's changing now, like it's really changing quite a bit. But this idea that the merchant society has more power than the residents is a very common theme here in Montreal. And we do have an office for residential or public consultation, which does very good work. But they're two different kinds of input. And at the end of the day, I think it's money that dictates. And who has the money is it really depends. Like even here, like this particular work that I did was sponsored by the commercial merchant society. Like they're and the person in charge, he understands, actually he has a very good understanding of the issues. Like they do have these are off-street parking places that are very near to the mall, and as you can see, there's nobody really in them. And part of the problem is they're not very accessible to the mall. So like they're nearby, but if you park your car here, it's not a pleasant walk. Like to get like here, this is the street you cross, and then you have to go around the block somewhere. And so it's like not like, and here's a tunnel that goes across, but it's like not a very pleasant tunnel. And here's another, like it's sort of hidden, these sort of passageways, and they're not necessarily very nice. And there's even an off-street parking facility like nearby, but it's not really very pleasant and widely used. So hold on. Okay, so these are some more recent photos. Let's see if it works. Okay, yeah, so here you can see, like, this is the pedestrian, this is the mall where the bus is up here. And this is walking from the metro station. Like, look, I mean, you see how wide the sidewalk is. There's a person standing here, and this is actually a bus stop as well. So like if people are waiting for the bus, like these people might be waiting for the bus. And like people are walking in the streets.
Yeah.
And it's just really, really not a great environment. This is behind the mall. This is a parking lot, which is, on the one hand, it's good. Some of it has been redeveloped into condos. We have shared vehicles in Montreal. We also, so these are all shared vehicles over here. Like that's great. But like we could do better, like to keep the cars away from the mall. Like this is what it's sort of, this is before the renovations. And you can see like all the traffic, and most of these cars have one people in them. They're not going anywhere. And like this is what the idea was, to create a place where it's comfortable for people to walk. Like, does this look like it would be nice to walk here. So here I did a walking tour with some people to sort of talk about all the challenges and the issues. This guy here, he is actually the head of the Merchant Society for the whole downtown core now. So so we're like talking about the various issues. They have street festivals in this area sometimes. There are like a few times per year, but they don't, like, even when they have these festivals, they don't really create any connectivity. Like Montreal is known for having street festivals. Like we often close down good sections of the street. In the past, they used to do it just for a few times, like for like during the weekend or maybe an entire week or things like that. We're starting to do it for longer, like maybe even an entire summer. But we still haven't, like there's no place where we do it sort of like in Stockholm, where it's only for certain hours, like during the day and every day. Like we don't have that sort of thing yet. And but often when they do open the street, I prefer to call it a street opening. Like we use it for the merchants bring out stuff, and you can use the street for all kinds of other activities. We have a lot of now, and especially even more so during COVID, we're building terraces like out into the street space. So here's an example. So there's lots of this kind of thing now going on, but you can see the sidewalk, it becomes very, very crowded. And this is a cycle path over here. And the way we design our sidewalks, pedestrians often wait in the street. This is what it looks like in the winter. Like we do have winter here, and the temperatures can get very cold. So the snow will turn to ice and freeze solid. So that makes it even more complicated to sort of walk around. So this is from the metro station going to the mall. Yeah, typical winter scene. And you see this person is on a bicycle. Like people do ride bikes here, even in these conditions. Here's another street scene. They even have like, they set up a stage, they might have music. But once again, like you can see that there's a lot of people who walk here and not a lot of space for them. And like these cyclists are riding the wrong way. There is in this area, technically there is a sort of reserved bus lane, but clearly it's not sort of very practical. Like a bus wouldn't fit in this space, even though technically it is a reserved space. And the sidewalk has been compromised, and there's bike parking and there's lots of obstacles here. It's just not a great space, and bike parking is an ongoing challenge. So this is during the renovations. Like they literally dug up the entire street and they had to redo all the water mains underneath, and they took down the thing that was attached to the buildings, and they built a new structure, which, and the idea was it would be nicer and better. And that the main thing is it's no longer attached to the buildings. So now it's easier to renovate the buildings, and there's a lot of changes going on. Because it's not attached to the buildings, actually, it doesn't offer as much protection against the weather. So now when it rains or snows, like the rain and snow actually go around sort of and underneath. So it's no longer as well protected from the elements. Yes, this is like this is during the construction, like a typical, street crossing scene. This is one of the access points of the thing. So like you can see how much work was done, and in the end, like they rebuilt it exactly as it was before. Like that's a common thing here in Montreal. This is my daughter actually who just left. Right? This is maybe 5 years ago. But we rebuilt it exactly the way it was. And this is a common thing as well. Like they did change the street, like when they rebuilt it a little bit, but not a huge amount actually. They didn't they did take away parking on one side, made the sidewalks a little bit wider. One of the things they did is they made a much better place for growing trees. Like that was a big problem in the past. The trees didn't survive, and the awning actually sort of got in the way. So the way they've integrated the trees now should be better, like we'll see in the future. But that was definitely a big part of the thinking, was how can we make this a space where trees can survive better? And they did use a lot of interesting paving treatments. I'm not sure if I have photos. So this is what the sidewalk looks like now. There are certain areas where this treatment is continued into the street. Like technically the street is a shared space now. So like technically anyone could go there, and probably it actually might be legal for cyclists to ride in the opposite direction. But as you can see clearly, they don't. Like it's very often common that cyclists ride in this space. There's a very generous space for pedestrians, but there's all these obstacles. Like there are these posts supporting the awning, and there's this sort of secondary post. There's bike parking here, and it's a very large space for people, but it's actually not very convenient for walking, and there's a huge amount of obstacles. So, and they've also been doing a pilot project with an autonomous vehicle that serves in the area, which is interesting and raises like a whole other set of issues. But this vehicle goes very, very slow, which I like. And it's, it has sensors everywhere. So it obviously stops for people. But like this is one of those intersections where it has to go out into the street to see. And it was hilarious to watch. Like it was not able to cross this intersection. Like basically it was like stuck there. It would like move ahead and people would sort of go in front of it, and it was just like totally stuck. And there's a guy inside who controls it in that case. but it sort of shows the limitations of autonomous vehicles. And
yes, testing that thing as well.
Yeah. So here's what it looks like. So you see the cyclists, like they're trying to ride in the street, and there's only parking on one side, and we kept the parking on this side. So there's only one lane of traffic, but there's not space for cyclists, and these are where the trees are. So they're still quite young. We'll see what happens, but they're not underneath the awning anymore. So in theory, they made more space for the trees. Yeah. So that's basically, yeah. So this is raised, like this area raises a lot of questions about, how do we allocate the space, to who do we allocate it for, who do we prioritize? Is it the merchants? Is it what do you do if there are no residents, for example? This building here, by the way, this building here to the left with the graffiti, this used to be a very big theater. And now it's not functioning as a theater anymore. It's not really functioning as much of anything. But how do we reuse? And there were quite a number of buildings of this scale that have been converted. Like this is a pharmacy now, but the upper levels are not used. Like it used to be a street that had these like really fancy sort of attractions, but that period only lasted for like maybe 15 or 20 years. And now it's sort of struggling to reinvent itself, and it's changing. Like it did have this sort of regional role where it was an area where people would come to buy wedding dresses, and sort of inexpensive wedding dresses also, or well, it became inexpensive wedding dresses. And it still has that role somewhat, but people don't get married in Quebec actually anymore. Like, and so it's really changing, and it is becoming more of like there are better quality stores going in there. There's a lot more bars, sort of not so much late night things, but there's lots of interesting restaurants as well. Like some of the better restaurants in Montreal have opened a place there, and so it's really changing and becoming more upscale. And there's an additional section of this which is it's not underneath it's technically not part of the mall, but it is also commercial and mixed. And I find the other section actually more interesting, that doesn't have this overhanging thing to protect the pedestrians, because it is more mixed. Like it has sort of mixed use. Ground floor is commercial and sometimes other types of space like services and things, and then above it is condos. So I think this section doesn't really have that. It's really only commercial. So I will stop. So it's interesting that the three of us all sort of chose a similar kind of street. Something that is, well, I think in your case, Raphael, it was a street that works well. Marta and I chose one that has challenges. Like I'm more interested in the places that have challenges, actually, like places that work well. We can learn from them.
Yeah,
but
I guess it's harder in your part of the world because of the car culture.
Yeah, well, Montreal is different. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love this city. Is Montreal is quite different from other cities in North America.
Okay.
It's a French city, and also it's harder to plan here. Like we have more levels of bureaucracy.
Okay.
So in some ways, we haven't been able to destroy the city as well. So we actually have an urban fabric, which is an interesting density, which works quite well. And you do see a lot of people walking here. Like in most North American cities, it would be very unusual to see like this many people walking around. Oh, you can't see what I'm seeing.
Okay.
But like a lot of people walk here and ride bikes just because we have a density and a sort of mixed use land use that makes it comfortable to walk and a practical thing to do. Like most of North America has a very strong separation of land uses. Like you have houses in one place and shopping malls and schools, are like all these things are separate. And here, like there aren't schools on this particular street, but there are many primary schools nearby. And so it's like normal for kids to walk at least to their primary school. Like secondary schools are often farther away. But and this isn't a part of town where there are universities, but we do have as well many universities. Many of them are in the downtown area, like the more central area. There's 4 pretty big universities and a number of colleges as well. So there's a lot of students in those areas, and actually a lot of people live in the downtown area of Montreal. So that's also different from most other North American cities where the downtown is really just office space. Like here we have a downtown where people live there, people study there. There's many things. One of the big problems there are universities and colleges, but there aren't other kinds of schools. So that's a bit of a problem. Like we would like to attract families to live there as well. And it's really been a problem to have like a primary school. There was a space that used to be a children's hospital that was converted, was given to a developer. And I mean, there were spaces that originally they were supposed to become set aside space for a school, but it's complicated and the land is so expensive. So if the city has to pay for the land, they can't afford it. So it's sort of like this sort of situation where we want to have schools down there, but nobody is willing to pay for it. And we haven't. Yes.
Sorry, guys, I will have to leave you. Unfortunately.
I think we're over our time anyway. Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So just finish up your presentations, and I will leave you, and then we will talk to each other on LinkedIn or catch up in some way. But thank you very much for the presentations. I was like super interested in everything you have to say, and would love to see the places in real life. Hopefully one day will be possible. So I also hope that you were you found my presentation a little bit interesting. So it was great to share it with you.
Thanks you very much, Marta.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
I think yeah, let's close. Let's close the meeting. Perhaps.
Yes, I agree. It was a pleasure to see your thing, and it's funny that I actually have been to that area.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, so it's been very interesting, and I'll try to think of maybe some sort of homework assignment I can assign to the other people who are not here. So yeah, so I guess basically what I want to do is explore sort of these issues and how they work or don't work in different places, and how we can make them better.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. So have a good, I guess you're already Sunday late afternoon.
Evening.